look is getting rough, isn't it? Well, that's lockdown for you. Welcome to episode number 4 of Indaba, the African Debate. My name is Mtutuzi Brian, and thank you very much for joining me today. Today we'll be talking about African literature. I've got somebody who knows a thing or two about African literature. So this is your chance to get into African literature if you've always wanted to, or your chance to learn a bit more. Let's dive.
My name is Rudo Diana Manyere, and I'm a Zimbabwean booktuber, blogger, writer, aspiring screenwriter who lives in the UK at the moment. Yeah.
Nice. Wow, I didn't even realize that screenwriting was involved in the mix. What got you into writing? What got you into reading?
What got me into writing, actually, I started writing when I would say in primary school. It was more of me just like back in Zim, we used to have like English classes where we'd write compositions, and I usually used to write movies, like a movie that I'd watched. I would just come and narrate it in my stories, and I would know that my teacher would not have watched the movie, so I kind of got away with it. And then as I got older in high school, so in high school, I ended up writing short stories in a notebook, and my friends used to love them and they would pass it around. And It died down for a bit. And then when I moved here, I just started the blog and I just started writing. It just picked up from there. And what got me into reading, especially African literature, was because I think I was a bit homesick. So it was more of me trying to find myself. So I started with Black American writers, and that actually took me a while to actually go to African literature, because I'd not known a lot of African authors except for Chimamanda at that time. And then as I got to read more, that's when I started reading more African literature, but it was more of me missing home, me missing something to relate to. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I just wanted to see myself somewhere where I felt like I was seen.
I think it's everyone that's not at home struggles with that aspect at times, where they just want to connect. I just want something to connect me with who I am, find out who I am. And that grounding sort of then lays the basis of sometimes how you navigate life wherever you are, really, isn't it? My biggest question, especially now looking at how most countries are going back into tighter restrictions all over the world. We're in lockdown in England and Scotland. What's the best way of getting into reading, especially for adults? There's quite a lot of adults from all over the world that just don't read a lot. Some of them want to get into African literature. What's the best way of getting into African literature and just reading in general?
I think the best way to start getting into African literature or reading is actually read something you like. You don't necessarily have to start with the greats. You don't necessarily have to start with Chinua Achebe or, the great African writers. Just start small. Start with something very simple, even if it's fantasy. You don't have to start with something very serious. Just start small and read what you enjoy. Because I think something that we lack as Africans is we usually want to read more for academics, not for leisure. And I think African literature has actually brought that into the light, that you can actually just read for fun. You don't necessarily have to read so that you have to learn something. At times you just have to read just because you like to read. So most people have asked me, how do I start getting into African literature? Because I think there's this notion that people think that all African stories have to do with poverty, have to do with, someone suffering. So cliche, African, someone has to move to a different country for them to find themselves. It's not always like that. There are beautiful stories within Africa, and not everyone is poor. Not everyone is going through cheating or, marital problems. They're actually great stories. So there's so many different genres when it comes to African literature. It's not just one. And I think just find what you like. You don't necessarily have to read what everyone else is reading. Just start small, even if it's an upcoming author, especially upcoming authors. I usually like reading upcoming authors because I think their stories are quite different from the ones that we're used to, because they're talking from a different perspective. Yeah. And I think that's also important.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I have slacked when it comes to to reading African literature. I think the most I have read is Ben Okri and the cliche lady that everybody knows. If you don't know who I'm talking about, then you need to do some soul searching in your life.
Definitely.
And I think the one that I want to really get into is it called The Old Drift? It's a book called The Old Drift, set in Zambia. I just can't wait to get into that. Apparently it's brilliant. Have you read that at all?
No, I haven't read it yet, but I'm soon to read it. It's actually in my basket. So soon, as soon as I empty it, I'm definitely going to read it, because I actually read the synopsis. I usually read like the synopsis of the book before I buy it, just for me to get a feel of it. Like what I say, you also need to read what you like. So I kind of like read this synopsis to see if it's something that I'm interested in, and I'll definitely read that. And I think she also has another book which just came out, I think early this year. I've forgotten the name, but I'll definitely read that.
Brilliant. Now, since we're on the whole idea of authors, who are your top 3 authors in Africa? Top 3. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
in Africa or African?
African literature. Yeah, African literature anyway. Top 3.
So I would say, as of this year, my number 1 would be Yagasi, who wrote Homegoing. I think for me personally, now in this moment, it's the best book I've ever read.
Really?
Only because it touched yes, I stand by that. I do not find any fault with that book, because I think it touched so many topics. And obviously, as a Zimbabwean, I can't really relate to like slavery, like the African Americans or the people in West Africa. But it was just the feeling of looking at it like through many generations. I think it's a very great read. I always recommend it to people who like, because the thing is, you can also read it for leisure, but you can also learn from it. So I think the way she uses her words, and it's not even like difficult English, it's like basic English. So it's not something which you have to strain to understand. It's very basic English, which you use to speak every day. So for me, and also like how she writes short sentences, I always find short sentences to be more captivating because they draw you in rather than long sentences. So I think the way she wrote the book and how the story was through I think it goes through 250 years on 2 different generations. I think it was brilliant. For me, it was just brilliant. And the second, I would say, Novio Chuma. Novio Rosa Chuma, she's Zimbabwean, and she's based in America, but she wrote this book called House of Stone. And it actually talks more about the Gukurahundi. As a Zimbabwean myself, born free, I was born after the whole independence thing. So for me, Zimbabwean history is quite vague. We're not really taught in depth. And when I got to know more about the Gukurahundi, it actually opened my eyes, because I always thought it was like a Shona versus Ndebele thing. And it was from then onwards, even now, this tribalism where like Zimbabweans and Shona, they don't really get along, but if you really ask them why, they don't really know why. It's just something which they grew up being told that Shona and Ndebele, this and that. And I think that has actually built so many walls for us to like come together. And the way that she explained how Gukurahundi came about, and I was actually privileged to meet her when she came to Oxford, and she actually explained to me that, because I felt, the thing is, when she was talking about the book and I had to ask a question, I was like, I'm so sorry that Shona people had to do this to you. And then she was like, no, it's not the Shona people who did that. It was actually the government who like had their own army, because they also killed Shona people in the process. So it was a learning experience for me, and for me to get to understand my own history, because I think sometimes we tend to want to learn other people's history and we abandon our own. So it was a wake-up call for me, because I had to face my own history and to understand like what happens within my country, rather than me always focusing on what's going on with, in America with slavery, even here in the UK. I also had to understand myself. And that also came with me wanting to connecting with home. So it was more of like, it was a clash at the same time. And I think the way that she portrays Samani, because the character in the book, Samani, is not very reliable. but you kind of see yourself in that, because we all think that we're good people, but not in everyone's eyes.
Yeah.
We always justify our actions. We always think it's for the best, but not in everyone's eyes. So Zamani was quite a compelling character, because you would see him do the wrong thing, but you would understand why he's doing the wrong thing. So I think that was also important. And another author who I like, African literature. My gosh, there's so many, I'm trying not to I'm trying to be more broad, not just to be centered in one area. But I would say Brian Chukwara. He's a Zimbabwean author. He's based in the UK. And I read his book called Harare North. I think for me, it was more of his use for diction, because the way he wrote his book is literal translation from Shona to English. So you can see there's a bit of broken English there.
Yeah.
And because I understood it, it was actually, I could relate in the sense that obviously, if you speak with your native language, your translation to English is quite different.
Yeah, that's true.
And also that the guy, I never in my life ever read a book by a Prozano person before. So that was actually, it was a different take. It's very good to read books that challenge you. It's very good to read. You don't necessarily have to read books that you enjoy. And this one was very challenging for me, because I was thinking, this guy, he was a Prozano. He was like one of those, what do you call them? The ferrets. I don't know if you know them. And he came here to work because he wanted to settle a debt. And his character, he was like those people. He was exactly what you imagine. But now the way he wrote it, he was in first person narrative. So it was like, you are the person. And I was like, oh, okay. And yeah, I think I'm looking forward to more of his work. I hope he writes more. And I think it's very important to, like I said before, to read things that also, challenge you. Because if you keep reading things that don't challenge you or that you always agree with, there's no growth there. So I think it's also important for you to read, and also as a writer, if you're a writer, to write things that are outside of your comfort zone. Yeah, so I think those will be the top 3 at the moment. Those are the only ones I could think of at the moment.
I'm sure we'll have you back on in about 6 months' time, and your view would have totally changed. That's usually the case when it comes to books, films, or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah, because I'm sure by then I would have discovered something else.
Yeah, very briefly, you mentioned something about screenwriting. How far have you gone in terms of screenwriting? Have you managed to start writing something? Is there something in the works that people can look forward to, or get interested in at the moment?
I would say I have something. I have ideas. Some of them are still here. It's just a matter of me putting them on paper. But I have something which I've started working on. And the thing is, I struggle with overthinking and wanting everything to be perfect. So that kind of stops me so many times. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. No one will like that. So I think I personally have actually stopped myself from writing more. But I have one which is quite interesting to me. And I think it would be something other people would like to see. I have the plot. I forced myself. I was like, Rudo, you need to write this. Even if it doesn't make sense now, just write it. In due time, it will make sense. Because I kind of have this habit of stepping in my own way. So I'm working on that. But I do have something. And earlier, I think 2 years back, I wrote something that was like this. It was like a competition or a submission on Instagram when someone was saying, oh, can you write something about church, how there's discourse in the church, with young people and older people, how they can't really, relate because there's this gap of religion and spirituality, the growth. And they did not really find it fitting at the moment. So I still have that, and I wanted to submit it somewhere, but then COVID. But I am working on it. I think that is my number one dream, to be a screenwriter. I look up to people like Issa Rae. I look up to people like Shonda Rhimes. I look up to people like Sisi Dangarimbo. I know she does plays.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit scared to put myself out there, obviously, because in my mind, I'm like, oh, you're not good enough. But I'm really working on that. So, yeah.
I'm not even going to ask the specific of what the works are about, because I know creative people hardly want to give away their work till it's either completed or it's actually out there. So I'm not going to ask for the specifics. All I'll ask is it Afrocentric?
Definitely. Always. All my things are Afrocentral. All my stories are Afrocentral. Like I say, I think it's just a matter of identifying myself, not that I'm growing up, you know, because obviously when I came here, that's when I realized, oh, I'm Black, you know, oh, I'm African. So I think now it's like coming forward that, okay, you have to embrace yourself, you know, and now in this day and age where like we actually have freedom to express ourselves, I think it's very important for me to give myself a chance to actually know who I am to the core, because I think in this world, we get so wrapped up in wanting to be like other people, we kind of forget ourselves. So I'm trying to move away from that. Of course, I have moments when I find myself wanting to, you know, to be like other people, but then I remind myself we're not all the same. But all my stories, everything that I write is all Afrocentric, centered in Africa, especially in Zimbabwe, because you know that's where I come from, and that's where I spend most of my life. Yeah. So yeah, definitely.
No, looking forward to that. And what I'll do, I'll drop your Instagram down below. I'll drop your website and all other contact details that you want to share. We'll drop them down below, and people can just sort of keep an eye out for anything that's coming up, and your YouTube channel and everything, so that people can also see some of the books that you've reviewed over the past few months and the coming books to review and everything of that nature. So as we move along, again, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to ask for your top 3 biographies, African biographies.
Ooh, top 3 African biographies. Okay.
I know you reviewed some about a week ago or something, but yeah, top 3.
Top 3 African. Okay, so just to put it out there, I'm actually starting to read more African bios, because I started with fiction. But those 2 are the ones which I started with. And it was Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba, I think, would be number 1. I did not know about Patrice Lumumba. I think it was after a picture on Instagram. I was like, oh, wow, that's a very good looking man. And then I was like, okay, let me see what more he has to open. And then I was like, oh, he died. And then I was like, oh, he was actually like someone who was very known. That's how I started knowing about Patrice Lumumba. And I think he was a great man, because I think he taught himself some of the things. I think he used to work in a tobacco or alcohol brewery where he used to work. And then from there, you know, he wanted to be more, you know, and I really liked also his relationship with his wife. I know that there's a letter he wrote to his wife, and I think, you know, he was a person. He had a character. He had feelings, you know. And I think that's something that's very important when it comes to biographies, for you to see a person who you can relate to. Because I think most of the time, some biographies, they only talk about, you know, coming to success. They don't really talk about everything. And with Patrice Lumumba, that really stood up for me, and I really wanted to know more about him. And I think a couple months ago, there was an article on BBC, where they were talking about how the people in Belgium, they didn't want to give up his teeth. And for me, that was very strange. I was thinking, can you give his daughter like his teeth? I don't understand why they need to hold on to that. And even up to now, I don't think a lot of people know how he died. I know there are pictures of his final moments, and I think he was a very brave man, and he stood up for what he believed in. And I would definitely want to know more about him. Obviously, there are videos which you can watch and learn more about him. But I think for me, that's number 1. Number 2 would be Julius Nyerere, because those are the 2 I've read so far. And I know this is like quite silly, but I thought Julius Nyerere was Zimbabwean. Only because we have roads in Zimbabwe. Wow. I was so embarrassed when I learned that he was not. And because in Zimbabwe, we have roles like Samora Machel, we have Julius Nyerere. Like what I was saying, we're not really taught African history, you know. We're just told about these people, but we never really go in depth. So it was actually eye-opening for me to realize that, okay, he's not Zimbabwean, that's good. And also like what he did for his country in Tanzania, he was a teacher, and then from being a teacher, and he was a very humble man, you know. He was like, they also, you have a chance to see him as a person, as a human being before he's a leader, you know. So I think that's something that's very good for you to see the human, you know, before you see the extraordinary things that they do. The third one, well, he is not African, or he is by default, but Malcolm X. Oh my gosh, that will be the best autobiography I've ever read. Yeah. I think that man was the most honest man I've ever read about. His autobiography, for me, it really changed the way that I look at life. And I understand what he stood for, you know. How we said, like, if you attack me, I'll attack you back. Because obviously as Black people, we're told to be very meek. And I understand that. As a Christian, of course, I'm like, oh, okay, turn the left cheek. But it's not always, I'm not inclined to do that all the time, okay? And I like how, you know, he was very honest, because from the book, from the start to the end, you know, he's very honest. You know, you see his life, what he used to be like, how he used to like perm his hair. You know, he had that loss of identity, wanting to be a white man, how he was dating a white woman who was married to another man, and then how he actually came out from that, like his journey. You get to see his journey and the decisions that he made, you know. And also, it was actually quite good to see the difference between him and Malcolm X. And at the end, you could see they were not very different at all. They were actually, they stood for the same thing, but it was in different, where they portrayed it in different ways. Because at the end, you kind of see like, okay, maybe they did not get along because of, you know, people saying Martin Luther King was more of like, you know, peace and all, but also Malcolm X was also about peace in his own way. So it kind of like opened my eyes to see that two sides can be right, you know. It's not always good or bad. It's not always black and white, you know. And I think for me, that's the best I've read so far. And so many people have said that. I think it's a book which everyone has to experience for you to fully understand.
100%.
And I would recommend that.
No, I'm a big fan of Malcolm X, purely because Malcolm X is a very black and white character. Well, he was a very black and white character in the sense that there was no gray areas around him. It was a case of, this is the path I'm taking, and that's it. You know, you can't divert me from this path. This is where I'm going. And if it means me being radical to get to the point I want to get to, then I will be. Another one that I would recommend as well is the biography of Captain Thomas Sankara.
Yeah. And
all Sankara wanted was freedom for West Africa, freedom for Africa from French colonial powers. He wanted Africa to be self-sustainable, which is a dream of a lot of guys, ranging from obviously Patrice Lumumba to Nyerere. All those guys had one dream, which is a self-sustainable Africa. So if you're to add biographies into that, I think the biography of Captain Thomas Sankara has to be involved at a certain point. Again, a guy that was black and white. I want success, and this is how I want the success, and it has to come this way. If it means we cut down on state expenditure, so be it. We're cutting it down just because we want long-term success for the country and for the region in general. So that's something to add as you go along. Hopefully you'll review it one day. I shall be waiting.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Right. The last one I'm going to put you on the spot now is your top 3 fiction books that you've read.
Top 3 fiction. Okay. Number 1. Oh my gosh, there's so many to choose from, you know. Okay. Number 1, there's this one I'm currently reading by Rumbizai Samantha Wajure. She's based here in the UK, and it's a debut novel. And it's about a girl who moves from Zim. She comes here and she's going through a transition. For me, I think it's because I relate to it, because I see myself in the girl, and it's like a step by step, you know, how she grew up, you know, the family dynamic, you know, how she had both parents, they provided for her financially, but they were not there emotionally, you know. And I think that's what most children in Zimbabwe go through. Not that it's the fault of the parents, but I think that's something that we need to discuss, that, you know, just because you provide for a child doesn't mean you're there for them, because you also need to be there for them emotionally, you know, for them to be able to grow up and to make better decisions. And it touches on so many topics which so many things which I'd forgotten happen back in Zimbabwe. Some things like there's witchcraft, like people, when they say if someone is old, automatically they're like a witch, you know, like all those biases that we have. And it also talks about how the transition from Zimbabwe and coming here, you kind of have like a culture shock. So for me, it's a book that I'm relating to. And also, she was a girl, was trying to find herself. And then there's also love there, how her first love, because she had to move here, you know, there was this breach of communication and stuff. So I think that would be one of the best that I've read so far in reading. Number 2 would have to be The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. Because she's a poet, so the way that she like forms sentences is quite intriguing, because she kind of puts character in the words. So it's very captivating. And also the topics that she touches on, like how women can be evil. Because in most books, I will not lie, women, they're portrayed as being, you know, the vulnerable ones. You know, it's kind of like, I don't want to say demonized, but most books, they shy away from making women the villain. Women, we can be evil. We are evil at times. And I think that's something most authors try to run away from. And I think the way that she portrayed that women can kill you. There's a statement that I saw that said, after God, fear women. And for me, that with that book, it really related, because those women, what they did, oh my gosh, you really need to, if you haven't read the book, if you read it, we can talk about it. I think it really put it out there that women can really be evil. They must be feared at times. And I think also like how she touched on impotence in men. I think that's something we don't really talk about as Africans. You know, it's always the woman. The woman is always the problem. She's the one who's always barren, and we don't talk about low sperm count and all those things, you know. And I think that was a very good read for me. Yeah. The third one, oh my gosh, can I cheat? Can I just Okay.
Now you can't bring up the other 3.
There's so many. I don't want to because there's so many. Can I talk about more than 3?
Well, go on. Why not? You can add a 4th one. Why not? Let's go for it.
There's so many of them. We Need New Names by No Violet Blayo.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. It's also about this one to other people it might seem as cliche, because she's coming from like poverty, then she moves to America, but there's also that culture shock, you know, of what happened. Like there's a girl called, I think her name was Chido or Chipo. She was raped by her father. There's HIV there, the stigma about HIV, you know, and how it's actually explained, but it's also from a child's point of view. So, you know, like how children, they're innocent, but they're also honest. You kind of like get to understand more, because I think children, there's some of them, they're the most honest people you ever meet. Of course, at a certain age, they just tell you as it is. So in that book also, it's portrayed how she talks about, like, I think it was a father who had HIV, and then how he died, and then the mother. And then the transition from Zimbabwe going to America, and also black tax. I don't know if you're familiar with black tax. That you have to take care of the people who saw you when you were 3 months. They'll be like, "Oh, you don't remember me? I used to change your diaper." And I'm like, "Oh, 3 months, man.
I don't need you in my life right now."
Yeah, you know. And then as soon as especially when you're here, people think you have money. People always think you have money. I'm like, I don't have, you know, And also, they don't understand that you also need to save for yourself, for your future kids. It's always like, as soon as you get something, you have to take care of someone else back home. And I think someone said that is the reason why most of us never really succeed. And I think Trevor Noah, he also touched on that. He was saying that his mom, after he got successful, she was like, you don't have to take care of us. And I think that's a very big gift, seeing how successful he was. He wasn't like, forced or held back by having to take care of everyone. It was his choice. But for most people, it's not really a choice. And another one, fantasy, would be Children of Blood and Bone, which I reviewed last week. Yeah. It was actually my second fantasy, but this one was YA. The first fantasy I did was more of a children's book. And I like that, as Africans, we can also think outside the box, We can also talk about magic. We can also talk about like different kingdoms, the things that we like people will like anime. You can also have African anime, There's also room for that. So for me, it really took me out of the norm, out of what I always read about, outside of what I know. So I had to like stretch my mind a bit, to imagine people with silver hair and gray eyes, that was with very dark skin, So yeah, I think those will be some of the best fictions I've read. There are so many, but I just can't think of any at the moment.
No, I'll put you on the spot, so I understand that you probably have so many ideas flying through your head at the moment. I think one thing that you raised in terms of things like black tax and the struggle of being sort of a young person moving from Africa to a Western country, I think that's definitely something I want to explore at a certain point. And I definitely would love to have you back for that, because I think that's a very strong topic that we tend to shy away from. There's a lot of challenges from moving from Africa to a Western country. A lot of different things. You start seeing yourself as a very different person to what you were. Because again, things like you're black, you're actually African, your accent is different. The way you pronounce your English is different. Everything becomes very pronounced, and it becomes very out there. And then you start having to question yourself, am I really who I am? Just to wrap up and round up, one book at the moment, one book that you haven't read or you have read that you 100% recommend, no reservations whatsoever. Say, guys, get on Amazon tomorrow, buy this book, get it delivered as soon as possible. Which one's that?
Okay. So one book that I always recommend, especially if someone is trying to get into the whole African literature bit, it's My Sister the Serial Killer, because it's quite intriguing. It's a thriller, but also because it's very small. It's not like there's so many chapters. There's like a chapter which has like 1 page, another chapter is 2 pages. So it's not a very hard book to read that you have to like, oh my gosh, when am I going to finish it? It's quite small. And because it's very intriguing, you will not get bored. So I would highly recommend My Sister the Serial Killer. It's one book that I've read, which I always tell everyone to get when they want to get into African literature. Something very light, but definitely that one.
Brilliant. So what I'm going to do is, as I say, guys, I'll put down is it Basic Girl Reads Instagram page? And I'll put down your YouTube channel as well at the bottom, and put that down at the bottom, and you guys can have a look and hopefully get into a bit of African literature. Rudo, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.